for a channel that's called Andy Boy Comics and Toys, it's about time I talked about something to do with comics. But since I'm in the DVD corner of my room here, I'm obviously talking about a DVD. So I'm talking about Daredevil versus Spider-Man. This is from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. I don't know if you remember that one. You should, because it was on TV like all the freaking time. This is not exactly what it says. It's not exactly like Daredevil versus Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man featuring Daredevil. Most of this DVD is 4 episodes of the Spider-Man animated show. The first 2 episodes on here featured Daredevil. And of course, how it always happens in every storyline, Daredevil has to be somebody's attorney. Because that's just how they write him into episodes as a guest star. And that, like, I mean, you remember She-Hulk? And, Daredevil was in that, and, like, they wrote him in because he's a lawyer, right? And she's a lawyer, and makes sense. Then there was the Incredible Hulk TV show back in the day, where Matt Murdock, Daredevil's alter ego, had to represent Bruce Banner in the trial of the Incredible Hulk. I have to go back and watch that. I can't really remember much about it. Anyway, Daredevil has to represent Spider-Man in court because, like, the Kingpin is setting up Peter Parker for, something that he didn't do and committing some crime. And Peter Parker's going to go to jail unless Matt Murdock can free him. But, of course, the 2 superhero alter egos of these 2 guys, Matt Murdock and Peter Parker, they have to solve the mystery. And I guess rather than going through the whole court process, Daredevil and Spider-Man can just solve this case. Okay, whatever. It's a comic book, dude. And that's what I liked about it. More like Spider-Man comics, and a little less like, say, Frank Miller's Daredevil comics, which were pretty violent and, a little more adult than Spider-Man was at the time. But yeah, you get your Kingpin in here. And Daredevil has always been an enemy of the Kingpin. And the Kingpin, of course, maybe starting in Spider-Man, was kind of adopted by the writers of Daredevil as like a main villain for Daredevil. So it makes sense that they would cross over, and of course they'd be fighting the Kingpin. The Kingpin, by the way, he's so cheesy. Like, he lives in a secret tower called Crime Incorporated at the top of what looks like the Chrysler building in New York City. And it's got like this big panel that folds out, and there's like planes fly in there, or like Spider-Man swings his web into there, and they can, I don't know, it's so comic booky, it's so stupid, but it's so not what the Kingpin really was in the comic books. But whatever, he works as a good, like, head villain for most of the storylines. Speaking of storylines, the next 2 episodes, they might involve the Kingpin again, but there's no Daredevil in the other 2 episodes, so this is a Spider-Man DVD. But it's called Daredevil versus Spider-Man because it's like, hey, we got Daredevil, alright. The 3rd episode has to deal with one of Kingpin's minions, I guess. His name is Smythe. If you've ever watched the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, this guy travels around in a hover chair, and he's like this super smart scientist dude, but then he gets mutated into this monster and fights Spider-Man, and then fights back against the Kingpin for turning him into this monster. And, oh god, it's dumb. That episode was like, no, thanks. And then the last episode is Spider-Man versus Tombstone, who also has links to the Kingpin, I believe. They should have called this Kingpin versus Spider-Man. But anyway, Tombstone is just a thug, but he also has his own kind of gang. And, of course, just like in every other episode, Aunt May gets kidnapped or threatened, and or Mary Jane. It's like, the whole Spider-Man thing was like, okay, I gotta keep my identity secret, because if people find out who I am, they're gonna go after my loved ones, and they're gonna, put them in danger. And, like, I'm Spider-Man, and I can protect myself, but I don't want to have to... But he's always protecting them, every single time, and it's just like a coincidence, usually. It's like, hey, Peter Parker, I hear you know Spider-Man, so I'm going to go and kidnap your aunt to make you tell me where Spider-Man is. Like, I get where it's coming from, and, Peter Parker realistically wouldn't give out his identity. You know, his loved ones are always in danger anyway. So why not just tell the world? What the fuck? Well, I guess that's what happened in the original Civil War comics. Yeah, the 90s Spider-Man show. We got 4 episodes of it here. And they weren't bad. I mean, I didn't like that third one, but overall it was pretty good. Like, I liked seeing Daredevil. I think he came off kind of cool, and they showed off his powers well in here. And the fact that he's blind, they have to bring that up every time Daredevil is around. And it's like, wow, for a blind guy, you're really good. There's actually bonus episodes on here, too. There's an episode of the Fantastic Four, which features Daredevil in it. So you get a little bit more Daredevil on this disc. Found that it was pretty much the same thing as the Spider-Man. Well, not the same, because of course it's the Fantastic Four versus Doctor Doom rather than Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. But Daredevil has to represent the Fantastic Four in court or something like that, and they lose their powers somehow, and Daredevil has to help them fight Doctor Doom to get him back. But probably the coolest thing, not necessarily the most entertaining, but the coolest thing about this whole DVD was they put an old episode of the 60s Spider-Man show on there, an episode featuring the Kingpin. And, oh, let me tell you, I love that Spider-Man 60s show, but this is not a good episode of that show. The music, yes, that's 60s Spider-Man jazz music, you know, and I dig it, but, man, they waste so much time, and it's just like, all you're hearing is this music, and the thwip sound, you know, like that Spider-Man makes when he shoots his web and stuff. Bizarre. It takes Spider-Man like 3 minutes to get across town in this one scene, and it's like, you could have had so much more in there. So, it just seemed really lazy. Like, you know, so many recycled shots, even just from the same show, but ones that we see all the time in Spider-Man TV show. The Kingpin's fine, and J. Jonah Jameson is fine, and Spider-Man Peter Parker, he's fine. And it's very representative of the 60s Spider-Man TV show, but there's just so much of that filler in there. It's just, it made me laugh that it was so ridiculously stretched out like that, and just seemed really cheap. Whatever. I was happy to see that on there. And I was happy to watch this entire DVD, actually. It wasn't fantastic, but it was a good watch. I enjoyed it, for the most part. So I think I'm going to have to give Daredevil vs. Spider-Man, let's give it a B. I think B is fair. I like Spider-Man. I like Daredevil, except for that Affleck movie. I like the Kingpin. I like the Fantastic Four. And it was great to see all that stuff in here. I mean, there was nothing that was really bad about any of it. I mean, there's a lot of cheesy stuff, and it's like very much like comic books. In that it's ridiculous and far-fetched and involves superheroes that can do impossible things that make no sense, and the storylines are silly and overly complicated. That's a comic book. There you go. Right here. It's like 6 comic books. 6 issues in one DVD. So yeah, I'm giving it a B. So until next time, have a good one, everybody.